I want to teach you a bit about media framing because Thursday actually gave us some really great examples of how a biased media can still hold power to account while also pushing audiences into believing specific narratives that show their bias. And this is something that I'll actually be going into more detail on Sunday on my live coffee and context session that you can find on YouTube and Facebook. Feel free to come and join me. Details are all available online now. But Thursday, we saw two really interesting news pieces hit. First was Christopher Luxon blindsiding his coalition partners with talks of a referendum on MMP, which he didn't run past anyone before announcing. Secondly, Labour released a fully costed business policy aimed to help the small to medium enterprises that Luxon offended by calling them babies last week. One is generally a positive piece of news that business experts seem to be seeing the benefit of if implemented, but it comes from the opposition, that the majority of our mainstream media have a bias against. The other is outrageous, chaotic, and looks like panic setting in from someone who's had a week of bad press, with everything from unemployment and business liquidation numbers to not being seen as having a spine when it comes to calling out racism from his own caucus. But our media has to both report and look at ways to subvert expectations to push its bias with these stories. And there's subtle ways that we can see that in action using something called framing theory. That's where media picks and chooses what it emphasizes or excludes to frame a story to tell us how to think about a topic. So how do they do that? Well, first, they put coalition headlines in much more prominent places than anything about the Labour policy announcement. Radio New Zealand, One News, The Herald, Stuff, they've all done this, despite the news about Luxon's comments technically coming out about 15 minutes before Labour's announcement. And here's the thing, the Prime Minister saying something dumb, again, or making a captain's call, like if he should catch an NH90 or an AW109 to get to Kmart, will often lead because it's the Prime Minister saying or doing dumb things. So this actually plays into an outlet's bias in a way. Then there's framing of the Labour piece. It's already been minimised in physical size, but Stuff frames it around ending a national party policy. One News's headline actually cuts off before they announce the part of the policy that promises the most significant increase in income promised by this policy, which tackles the cost of living issues that voters have identified in the recent Ipsos Issues Monitor poll as being the biggest concern facing them at the moment. And both the Herald and Radio New Zealand didn't put the Labour policy on their front page by the time that I was making this video, but Radio New Zealand did place and frame a story from ACT's talking points about pharmacies, and the Herald ran a story vilifying Winston Peters, which is a media method that's part of what we call Entman's functions, which I'm also covering on the weekend. Oh, and they paywalled a piece talking about the cuts to the vaunted Golden Kiwi visa program. But because those are paywalled, you have to be really keen to read the criticisms of the coalition. And if we look on social media where algorithms drive engagement and engagement drives framing, Radio New Zealand haven't covered Labour at all. But here's a hero shot of Chris Luxon on his referendum. News Talk also didn't cover the Labour policy, but here's another hero shot of Chris Luxon on the referendum. The Herald minimised Labour's announcement to a single sentence about small business policies and an awkward image of Chippy, and they have a admittedly slightly less awkward image of Christopher Luxon, but he had two posts about his referendum announcement, a neutral one and one driven by reaction. But that means twice the coverage already for Christopher Luxon over Chippy on their socials. And they're also the only media that's actually mentioned Luxon's comments on a 4-year term in their presentation, a plan that was being looked at by the government until Paul Goldsmith announced that suddenly they weren't looking into it anymore months ago. But media hasn't mentioned that part. Oh, and the Herald, that also live streamed David Seymour's pharmacy announcement. It's little elements like these, the placement, the language used to frame stories and headlines, the way it's presented and how often on social media, and what else is framed around it and whose perspective is used to frame other stories that show us our media has a bias in play. But if you don't know what you're looking for or looking at, it is really easy to believe that media telling you the latest dumb thing our Prime Minister has said, or the latest racist thing our Foreign Affairs Minister has said, or the latest policy announced by the Deputy Prime Minister that goes against expert advice, is media having a bias against them. When in reality, that's media finding their way to have their cake and eat it too. Hello there, Kia ora podcast listeners. I have to admit, I was sitting there this morning going, I want to do something of a promo for Sunday's live stream and tie it into what we're dealing with in the news at the moment, and also going, because as I don't know if you can hear it, actually, I'm a little bit sniffly still. So I'm trying to get rid of that. And so my brain is all a bit all over the place, and it's just like, what am I going to do? So yeah, it has been an interesting one looking into this particular topic around framing, because as we get into the election, I think it becomes a lot more of a nuanced job for our media to balance what their bias is. And I should really point out, and I haven't done this in the video, media bias doesn't mean that the reporters themselves have a specific bias. Some do, absolutely. Reporters, journalists, media personalities, some have a very clear bias. It would be very hard to say Mike Hosking or Ryan Bridge is balanced after all. But just because they have a bias doesn't mean that their media outlet has that same bias. Sometimes outlets differ in bias. If you look at somebody like John Campbell, for example, he's a dedicated lefty who's on Radio New Zealand, which likes to position itself as centrist, but there are actions that Radio New Zealand do that are really clearly framing the right in a certain way, which means that to me and to a lot of other people in this field, Radio New Zealand starts becoming right-leaning in how they present information and how their bias works. And so I kind of wanted to point that out. And I know every time I talk about media bias, I'm going to get one idiot who posts something stupid like, well, there was this 2022 survey that said that our media runs left, which is a Curia poll that was done by people who chose to do it. There's so many issues with that. And as I said before, media bias isn't about the individual journalist. It's how an editor might frame something that goes out. It is how the person writing the bylines might write a title for it. It's the image that they use. It's all about framing. And so that's what I wanted to focus on today. And so I was really lucky in a way to get two really different announcements or news pieces. The first one being Labour's business policy. And I knew Labour had a business policy coming out this week. I just didn't know if it was like big business, small business, how it worked. I know it was on the table, like on the cards before Christopher Luxon said stupid things to upset business owners. It's just a coincidence that it came out at this time. But it's funny to see. But that framing hasn't actually been used in media. They haven't gone, well, Luxon did that and now look what Labour's doing in reaction, which is kind of good to see because that's not what the case is. But I thought they'd jump at it. Because then that frames it around Luxon. But then you have Christopher Luxon doing his whole MMP thing. And I'm hearing words that there's a bit of scrambling going from within National at the moment because, oh my God, we had no idea this was going on. This is the problem with captain's calls. His coalition partner's clearly blindsided. I did a bit of a quick Google on this one. If you were to remove the MMP seats that we have in Parliament, because our Parliament is 120 seats, 72 of those are electorate seats. National would still have the majority. They won 43 electorates at the last election, and then ACT actually won 2. So yeah, we would still have the right-leaning government that we've got. Labour, Te Pāti Māori, and the Greens won the rest of the seats. I think, what was it, 26, 2 and 6. I'm pretty sure is what the breakdown was for the other ones. So, yeah, definitely not the majority. But New Zealand First didn't win any seats. New Zealand First hasn't won electorate seats for decades. So I could see why they would certainly be upset at the loss of MMP. And I think losing MMP is a bad idea. I actually really like MMP as a system for getting proportional outcomes. But yeah, I thought this is a bit of a dog whistle. You often see, in the same way that the English language bill was a dog whistle, you see the same people complaining about how MMP is dragging people on, and then complaining about DEI, which is stupidly ironic. So yeah, there was two really big stories. I'm like, okay, this is a great one to do a piece about framing. So that's what I've done. But I also wanted to allude to a couple of other things, like Entman's mask, which I'll go into more detail on Sunday, so feel free to come along, 10 o'clock Sunday morning, YouTube, Facebook. I might even be able to get it working on my Instagram page, but I wouldn't count on that. That's not a guarantee. So yeah, that was my logic behind this one. I wanted it to be educational and informative while I sit here also trying to get oxygen to go through my nose and prep for Thursday night's appearance on BHN. I'm talking about the Open Brief website. Oh my god, that website. They do a monthly report. So we're going to go over the monthly report that came out in the last couple of days, because there's stuff in there that I completely forgot about, like the missiles that the Chinese shot into the Pacific that had everybody going, ugh. Yeah. So that's tonight. So by the time you get this tomorrow, you can go back and watch that as well. I also had the things pop up today going, nominations are open now for the New Zealand Podcast Awards. So I have to get that organised for this, and I'm going to do a nomination for the collective as well. Lots to do, lots to get done. Yay! Oh well, what would I do on the weekend if I had nothing else to do but this? Who knows? Who knows? Right, keep yourselves warm out there. I will catch you guys all later. I'm also hopefully working on a relatively big name guest to come join me for the Campaign Kōrero podcast episode for next week. But I will keep you in the dark on that one until I have something confirmed, and then I might actually put a question up on the YouTube community page, maybe even the Facebook page, asking if people have questions. But we'll see. We will see how that goes. All right. Until then, until next time, look after yourselves. Ka kite anō. Have a fantastic day. Live long, prosper, be one with the force, and I will catch you guys all later.